Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Ann Carville and I'm an education blogger and member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Pat Brady, the superintendent of Potsdam Central School, in the studio. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Well, guess what we're going to talk about?
Oh.
Budget, finance,
Go
numbers.
figure.
You're right in the middle of budgetary matters at Potsdam Central. But I thought we would talk about, bigger numbers too, what's going on at the state level and local level. But before the interview, I thought about what does the general member of the public think about when they think the school budget is about to come? I think that they think about, are there more lost jobs? Are there more lost programs? And what are my taxes going to go up by? So to begin it, can we just keep it at a general level of answering those sorts of concerns people have?
Certainly, since what we've seen since 2008, those are very legitimate questions to ask school administration and officials. This year, we're still pretty early in the process, and we're having our first spending plan presentation on Tuesday, and we hope that members of the public will come and engage in that conversation with us. But after many years of reduced funding and cuts as a result of the Great Recession, we thought maybe this year would be maybe a little easier. The state was looking at an over $4 billion surplus. But then the governor surprised us a bit when he came out and said, here's the executive proposal. I'm not going to give you the state aid allocations, as we know in the business as state aid runs, so that we know what that means for Potsdam and the other districts. So we're really, in many ways, flying blind right now, trying to figure out what our budget is. We can certainly look at what our expenditures, most of our expenditures are going to be, what we might put in for fund balance, what we might put out for a tax levy, but that missing piece that we need to look at is not there yet. So it forces us to look at various scenarios. What ifs? What if we get nothing? What if we get $377 million across the state? What if we get the 1.1, which was the ceiling that he proposed? Right. So there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Big guessing game. Makes it hard to do your job, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, let's move on to the GEA, the Gap Elimination Adjustment, which you know about. And I'll just, by way of a little background, it started in the 09-10 school year. New York State deducted monies from the state allocation amounts that were supposed to go to each district because they had a shortfall. The GEA has, Senator Ritchie has called for it to be repealed, and it has been publicized that it has cost schools across New York State upwards of $8 billion. If you would you expound on the GEA, its impact, whether schools will ever be made whole for what they've lost and what they should have gotten, and what the GEA means going forward? What do you see happening down the road with it?
In a nutshell, because many people don't understand what the GEA was, but back with the Great Recession again, the state was facing a $10 billion gap. They needed to eliminate that gap. So they chose to look towards education to cut that funding so they could eliminate that gap in their funding. It was supposed to be a short-term fix, and then later that money would be restored. Well, it hasn't been restored. Some of it's been restored, but there's still just over $1 billion that has not across the state. And for a school district like Potsdam, there's $1.2 million that has not been restored. And we've lost about $9 million that would have flown to Potsdam over the course of that time period, the last 6 years, that didn't come. And that's why it led to 50 jobs cut and many different programs cut, and us looking at merger and a variety of other initiatives that we took forth in order to meet that. I'm not sure if we'll ever get back to where we were. We are still, I know the governor likes to say that the last 2 years he has provided a great deal of increased school aid. That's true over the last 2 years, but we're still $500,000 less right now in state aid revenue than we were back in 08-09. Okay, so we still have a long way to go. So whereas there might have been increases, We lost that revenue then, and we're still not back to where we were in 08, 09.
And prices have gone nowhere but up.
It was,
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah.
We've had a bit of less inflation lately, which has been helpful to us as far as electrical prices, and we have done some work with our energy efficiency groups to keep those prices down. But these are things that we're doing to deal with the issue. Yeah. So the GA is a problem. I'm very glad that our state legislators are looking at that. It's a complex issue because some schools like Potsdam, who are average needs, they were hit the hardest. Our per student GEA cut was the highest of any school in the county, and one of the largest in the state. And we still we have about over a $700 per pupil cut in GEA. The average in the state is just over $300. So we're $400 more per student in lost money than the state average, and that is tough to make up. But it is a bit complex in that school districts that are high needs, they're poorer than we are, they weren't hit as much with the GEA. So if the state were to restore that $1 billion in GEA, that would be great for Potsdam, but it's not going to be as great for the poorer districts. So what you end up with is a kind of a compromise that they will flow some money through the foundation aid to help the poorer districts, and also cut some of the GEA to help districts like Potsdam.
Well, you know, it's interesting, in the governor stated the state speech, Pat, he was talking about poverty areas across the state, and he talked about the North Country, high poverty, Buffalo, high poverty, and the Bronx. So that's the grouping we're in with, and you know, these students need an education. And you know, it just seems unfair that they have been hit so hard.
We have a lot in common with people in the Bronx and in Buffalo when it comes to poverty, because poverty is poverty. If you don't have money, it creates many issues for funding of schools, and also many social issues that communities have to deal with.
Absolutely. Speaking of the governor, let's talk about him a little bit here.
Okay.
Let's see. He was on the radio and television, everything, with his State of the State speech, and he had some information, especially on education, that caught everybody's attention. He said, as you mentioned earlier, Pat, that he's willing to increase education funding by $1.1 billion if significant reforms are made. Many of the reforms, if not all, he said, were recommended to him by the state education department. And I'll just go down a few of them. $20,000 performance pay for highly effective teachers, 5 years to get tenure instead of 3, authorization for 100 more charter schools, strengthening teacher evaluations. He called the current ones baloney, as you may recall. And one of the facts, so-called facts, it might be debatable, that he used about that was he said only 37% of high school graduates are college ready, but yet 98% of the teachers are rated as effective across the state. So he found that to be quite a conundrum, that's something he felt should be done about. And the last thing, making it less costly to remove failing teachers. And as he has said, most administrators don't even try to because it's too expensive, they can't afford to. So those are just among some of them. So he said he'll increase it by $1.1 billion if these and other reforms are met. If not, and you said this earlier, he'll increase funding by $377 million. The Board of Regents recommended $2 billion increase in funding. So what I'm asking you to weigh in on is the reforms that he's asked about, the funding recommendations and how they differ, and the governor withholding state aid estimates and how difficult that makes it for you to plan your budget.
That's a lot in one question, and you could probably spend a whole show on any one of those reforms. And therein lies part of the problem, is that many of these reforms are multifaceted, and you now have the governor placing a lot of reform bills into a budget bill. And it puts a lot of pressure on the legislator to do the work of the budget when you're dealing with these reforms. And I think really some of these reforms, which I don't disagree with the governor on some of the changes. You know, I do think that he paints a broad brush when it comes to student achievement in New York State, because what he talks about, I don't recognize Potsdam in many of the things that he says in terms of student achievement and in terms of low amount of students ready for college and career. Can we do better? You bet we can, and we do, and we consistently work to get better. But it's a broad brush, and it allows him then to make these, pull back monies and make these kinds of statements in looking at some of these reforms. As I said, some of the changes, making it easier to get rid of incompetent teachers, I agree with that. It is difficult in order for administrators now, under the existing law, to get rid of teachers who are not competent. Changing tenure, I think, is something that should be explored in terms of the amount of time. I understand the reasons for tenure. Tenure was started at a time when teachers could be removed for their political affiliation, or for their views, or for because of somebody's relative wanted the job. There's a variety of reasons. So there's reasons why those laws were put in, but their laws change over time with conditions, and I think some of these things we need to look at. We also need to continue to look at increasing student achievement, but we also need to deal with the poverty issue in our state, and that's where you see that in those areas which have high poverty, not all, there's many schools with high poverty that are doing very well, but poverty is an issue that is leading to some of the low scores. It has been challenging when we didn't receive, as I said earlier, the state aid runs, to know, because the governor is saying, if you don't enact what I say, these reforms, you won't get anything. I know he has said $377 million, which is basically the amount of money it would take to pay for what we've already spent for our categorical aids like transportation or BOCES or special ed monies, which we, as you know, being on a board before, where you spend in one year and you get the aid the next. Right. So we spent it last year, so this 377 is paying us for on formula what we already spent. Right. But his actual bill says we wouldn't receive anything, and that would be a disaster for schools around the state if they were flat, because there's the regents, the Educational Conference Board, which represents several organizations for education, which includes the PTA, school boards, superintendents, teachers, and so forth, have said we need at least $2 billion this year in order to, one, meet our costs, and two, deal with the reforms that are coming down in Common Core and APPR and many others.
So as you say, this money is needed, but my question is, he seems to have put it on the table, or he has put it on the table, reforms, and you get money. Right. And you're not getting $2 billion, you're getting $1.1 billion. So, who's going to blink? Will anyone blink, or are the schools going to suffer and have a disastrous year again? Well,
they'll need to be compromised, and we'll need to figure out which of those areas of reform is he going to be very strong on. He seems to be very strong on the teacher evaluation system. He had a lot to do in having that enacted into law. It hasn't worked out the way I think anyone would have liked it to really identify who are the teachers that are from ineffective to highly effective. That's why when he talks about gauging teacher dismissal or additional pay for teachers based on a system that isn't telling you what's valid, is really putting the cart before the horse, because you need to get it valid. His change would be that now 50% of a teacher's evaluation would be a test.
On the state mandated
On the state mandated test, which I think there should be part of an evaluation that is student achievement, student results, but 50% on state tests that change from time to time, or any test. I just don't agree with that.
One of my concerns, Pat, when I thought about that was, as you said, it has to be 50% on state mandated tests. That's what he wants. But the validity of these tests has been questioned. Many of us have read some of the questions ourselves and scratched our heads like, what? This is a bizarre question for a child. And so Given that there's questions about the validity, my question to you is, would any of us want to be completely identified by, say, our SAT scores? Is that exactly what you are or what I am or what
Right.
the public is?
Right.
We don't want to over-rely on that because anyone involved in education knows there's so much more to us than a test in terms of our capabilities, our potential, et cetera. So with the governor pushing for 50%, I'm not sure what he's thinking.
I'm not sure, but I think it's an area where something will probably come out of that because I don't believe he's going to give up on the idea of testing and evaluation.
Right.
And also in the other part, which would be the evaluation by the administrator, he's stating that a portion of that has to be from an outside administrator.
Right.
So I'm wondering how that's going to be paid for, especially since we haven't had any appreciable relief on any kind of mandates that school districts and municipalities are dealing with. Now that seems to me like an added mandate that all school districts have to find people, possibly from outside the system, to evaluate our teaching staff, and so that's going to be a challenge.
Well, what about Potsdam Central specifically? Are there some details that you haven't mentioned yet that you want to talk about with regards to Potsdam's budget that you're working on?
As I said earlier, it's early in the process, but right now we have gone through the budget very closely. We are looking at some possible additions because our needs change. We're looking at possibly a reading teacher to help out at mostly the middle school, but it will impact our elementary school as well. Is one of the main things. We're not a lot of additional staff, but we are looking at that to help out our students to be able to read and read early so that they have that success. We're probably looking at the same amount of fund balance in our budget as we had last year, about just over $2 million, which is considerable. That is something I'm always concerned about is that fund balance, because once you use it, it is gone. But again, I know it was reported in print that maybe we are better off this year than we have in the past. And I think the statement needs to be qualified that if we get $1.1 billion in state aid and it runs on a good formula, similar to, or at least it runs on what we received last year when it was $1.2 billion,
Right.
then we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Still using quite a bit of fund balance. We'll probably be looking at a tax levy somewhere between 2% and 3%. Which is somewhat of our average. Our tax cap is actually over 4% because we have capital project debt, and that's part of the calculation.
So there's no fear of going over the
There's not a fear of going
cap.
over the tax cap. We would never put out, I would say never, but we certainly would not want to ever put out something in the 4 range. It would be around 2 to 3%. But as we've shown before, more often than not, if we tell the public in May that we're going out with say a 2.9% tax levy increase, when we set the tax rate in August after the tax rolls are done, we are usually less than that. And it happened again last year where we ended up more like 1.5%.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Pat, since we're talking about Potsdam specifically here, recently there was a failed merger between Canton Central and Potsdam Central, and the public made its voice quite clear on that. It was rather decisive, yeah. I know one of the hopes of some people who supported it was that there would be an influx of money that could help both Canton and Potsdam get through some rough years, and hope that there's changes in laws, changes in many things with regards to the state. It failed. What's the impact now that this hope of extra monies is no longer around?
Well, we went into the merger process knowing we were in an uphill battle because in general about 9 out of 10 mergers fail. It's a very difficult process. We thought in our case where because of the cuts we'd had to make and what the future looked like, that there may be some interest here. We did an educational campaign, and many people got involved. But in the end, the public voted in both communities about 70-30%. They voted down. We respect that, and you do move on from there. And we understood it, as I said, it would be a big lift. Probably on that morning when one of the voting machines broke, when the no lever broke off one of the voting machines, I was pretty sure we were in trouble.
We're in trouble.
Yeah. But anyway, moving on from there, we are continuing to look at our budget. We're continuing to make cuts when we can, maximize our aid with the BOCES, use some of our space. Most recently, we have the annex building that used to be the daycare facility. We are doing a small project on that, and we will receive rent money from the BOCES on that. And we also are looking at as being a location for a new PTech, Pathways and Technology program, early college program, where students will be able to receive, before they get out of school, an associate's degree in the health services field, to locate that in Potsdam.
Wonderful.
And that will be rental space and be location that our students can look at those. And some of our families are already interested in that. So these are ideas, things that we look at to try to fill the gap, make cuts where we need to. But we don't have that additional aid, and we have to just try to be as frugal as we can. I know some have brought up the issue of shared superintendency, that type of thing. We are sharing, some of our administrators, we do share our buildings and grounds supervisor with Norwood, and we share our food service director with Parishville. We get, and it's worked, but those are one department. What I think that sometimes people don't understand is that if you have a superintendent now over 2 buildings, if it's merged, you have one board of education, you have one set of policies, you have one set of contracts, and so forth. When you're a superintendent over 2 different schools and they're not merged, now you are leading 2 boards of education, 2 staffs, separate contracts, many different policies that are very different. You were on the board, And I know it may have worked in one place locally, didn't work in another, but I think Potsdam is large enough where to try to do that would be very challenging for a person to try to take all of that on.
Okay. Pat, another burden to schools for a few decades now, I know in the 90s when I was on the board, it was becoming a big problem. That's the cost of health insurance. And you've provided the public with reports over the years of how this cost has been skyrocketing, and some would say it's been crippling schools. Where does it stand now? Do you see any hope in the future of those costs going down, stabilizing, or is it going to continue just to be too onerous a cost?
It's a major cost. It's over 20% now of our budget, as it is in many school budgets. And I know the governor has talked about, well, we need to be sure that we're negotiating hard at the bargaining table for health insurance, because it's not a unilateral decision by boards and administration to make those changes. It has to be worked out. At a time when school districts have had less resources than they ever have, they didn't have a lot to bargain with at the table for health insurance, and still in many ways really don't. And with step increases in contracts, it makes it even more challenging, because there's an automatic increase in salary and that you don't have to bargain for for health insurance. I think it is a cost that continues to increase, for us about 7% a year, and it's a challenge at the table. Right now, with one of our groups, we've been out almost ending our 3rd year without a contract, and it comes back to really down to health insurance and trying to get some change in health insurance.
I know this sounds naive, Pat, but it's something that people talk about. do you ever see the future where all of the public schools in the state united and had the power to buy insurance together? Because that would be a tremendously powerful group. I mean, could that ever happen?
I think it could, and in fact, I think it's one of the, we've been doing a lot of advocacy work lately. We have a group of teachers and parents and administrators and other members of the community who have come together and are trying to get the word out on education. And one of the things we've talked about, and this has been brought up by the New York State School Boards Association, is having that type of group, a statewide group of public employees that or just educators that would have their own. So, and have a certain amount of contribution. So we are not trying to deal with and negotiate at every single school district in the state, because that's where it's been very challenging. I really like to see that explored. I think it has the potential to bring the cost down.
Right, the sooner the better, but we know how things work. It won't be too quick. The other issue I thought I'd bring up, Pat, is the teachers' retirement system and the employee retirement system. They have large funds, of course, being held for each of them. They have to pay out the pensions. And I'm wondering, with the increase that's going to happen this year, which I think I read in the paper that it wasn't going to be, that it might go down this year? Okay, so my question is it going down because so many people have lost their jobs? Or is it going down because the stock market is booming and they're able to keep their funds where they want them?
It is going down for both the teacher retirement system and the employee retirement system. It's on a 5-year rolling average, so part of it is that those bad years when the pension funds were invested in the stock market and the Great Recession hit and a lot of value was lost, those years are now out of that average. And actually the pension funds are now even healthier from what I've read than they were before the Great Recession. So there has been a bounce back there. And for the first year, this is a bright spot in the budget, for the first year, we're now seeing a decrease. So for teacher retirement system is going down from 17.53% of payroll down to around 13.65. And that's a savings of a couple $100,000 for the district. And the employee retirement system for all our support staff, bus drivers, secretaries, custodians, et cetera, is going down from around 20.1 down into 18, in the area of 18. So that's great. Understand though that years before we were in the single digits as well, right? And I think there should be some changes there so that we don't go through these types of peaks and valleys that we have seen. Part of our problem in the last 6 years has been the peaks. We've reached these peaks. But it's a bright spot this year in the budget that we're starting to see those decline, and declining a little bit more than the actuarials had said they were going to decline.
Well, that is good news.
Yes, that is great news.
Pat, unfortunately for Potsdam, you'll be leaving the superintendency and you'll be taking over at Messina Central. So I was wondering if there was, as we wrap up here, if there's anything you wanted to say about your move.
One of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make in my career. I've been at Potsdam as a teacher for 12 years and superintendent for 10. I've lived either in the town of Potsdam or in the Potsdam School District for about 25 years. Great district, great people to work with. It's been wonderful. I also worked in Messina. I started my administrative career in Messina as an assistant principal, then a principal of summer school too, teacher of summer school. So I know the district. It's a great district also, and it's got great and dedicated people in community who really want the best for their kids. And it just seemed like the timing is right for me. Many people who are in my position as a superintendent to go to a larger school and later in their career have to move out of the area. I feel pretty fortunate that I have this opportunity, and I appreciate all the people who have helped, who I've worked with here in Potsdam, and all the people who have supported me to go to Messina. I'm looking forward to the challenge, but it's not without definitely some some sad feelings about leaving for sure.
I'm sure. Well, we'll miss you, but I want to thank you very much for coming here tonight and sharing information with the public. I'm sure the public will appreciate it when they get a chance to view it.
Great.
So,
hope it was helpful.
oh, it certainly was. Our time's up, Pat. Thank you all. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, produced here in the studios of WCKN on the campus of Clarkson University. This show is a civic collaboration